Good evening, and thanks BIC for this event, and thanks Vishwanath for being for this conversation. Let me start by saying, when I moved into Bangalore, I was born and brought up in Bangalore. I was doing a lot of in the for initial stages of my career. I was doing a lot of advertising photography, so quite gung ho about the liberalization that was happening. It helped bring down the import duty on cameras from 250%. Okay, so I was a commercial photographer at that time, and I really didn't care. It was I'm talking about early mid 90s. Whether it rained in Bangalore, it didn't. I used to tell my friends that as long as it rained in our catchment of Kaveri, we are fine because we're getting water from there. So there was a chance meeting with the Vishwanath once. He was with HUDCO in his office. I very clearly remember, and I've quoted that conversation in my book, Bengaluru, Bangalore, first person singular in the essay. Then where he told me about, he kind of explained the kind of situation the city was already in at that time, and he said the word, we are sitting on a tinder box vis-a-vis as far as the water security is concerned. We don't know where it will go, how it will go, and we cannot depend on Kaveri all the time, was his first that was the first conversation that we had, and that kind of got me thinking. But it was much later, I think, when this must have been late 90s or so, I guess. So much later that, my wife is Bijoyini Satpathy, who was a dancer. She and I, we were, just before we got married, we bought a piece of land in Hesarghatta, near Nrityagram, because she was there at that time. And it was a eucalyptus grove, and we took away all the trees, and we were planning to build a house. So Vishwanath kind of visited, and he gave us the divining water, and it was a good, fun, I think, half a day. And he also gave me some thoughts on how I could conserve rainwater that fell on that piece of land. It was at that time middle of complete nowhere, and those ponds are still in existence that we made that catches rainwater. So kind of water journey began then. And Hesarghatta Lake, of course, was part of my everyday commute in and out of that space. And soon, so this was 2004. Yeah, Hesarghatta had completely dried out, and a group of people had started working, trying to do some rejuvenation activities, and that's where I got in. So before I get into that, I just want to ask Vishwanath to take us through the kind of a timeline of Hesarghatta, even before that. So Vishwanath, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So glad that you remind me of those days, Mahesh. And apart from the wrong choice of metaphor, tinder box for water is somewhere one's grammar was lacking, and I was young and wise then, and I'm old and foolish now. So I try and figure out what water means. So with Hesarghatta, it's fascinating. It's in many ways epochal for what is urban India and waters, right? So it's not seen in that light by even the practitioners of water. I personally am a civil engineer. I'm an urban planner. I work on water from an infrastructure perspective. So for me, water is how many liters per capita per day and how many million liters for a city to be supplied with. So, but then along the path, I've just started to sort of look at the history of water supply and also the ecological aspects of it, right, Mahesh? So here's Hesarghatta's timeline. Vijay Tiruvadi was here, and he was making one heck of a presentation of the history of Bangalore. So it's a very, very interesting, that presentation, because it was on Lal Bagh, and he was talking about the geological history of Bangalore. So it starts there. It starts at 3,700 million years ago. The uplift of this particular space, geographical space, which we call Bangalore and the surrounds now, And that we are 900 to 920 meters above sea level. And at that time, the rock formation is happening, which is in Lal Bagh, portrayed much, but also Hesarghatta. So Hesarghatta has got this typical iron soil, which does not allow trees to grow, therefore becomes a grassland. And then the difference between a grassland and a forest, you'll come to that, I'm sure you'll talk a lot about it. But that's what creates Hesarghatta. And somewhere in the mid-1600s, I think that the first tank is built there, the Kere is built there, and Uday Kumar is here, and you're here, you're going to talk about the inscription stone which describes the original tank, the original Kere. But the history of it with vis-a-vis Bangalore starts somewhere in the mid-1870s. We have 3 years of drought, continuous drought, 2 years and 10 months of continuous drought. There's a famine. The drought means that all the tanks in Bangalore, which are the sources of water, are dry. The wells are dry. About 100,000 people die in what's the kingdom of Mysore. And that time, the city fathers, to use a gender inappropriate term, are worried about the water supply for the city. Right? This is the mid-1870s. And they seek permanence. The tanks are insufficient to supply water to the city of Bangalore. That's clear. So then there is a reconnaissance of sort, and under Diwan Seshadri Iyer, who comes in the 1890s, we start to see Hesarghatta identified and worked upon as a source of water supply to Bangalore. That's the Diwan Seshadri work. And it's fascinating because this tank is then expanded, silt is dug up, a bund is made bigger, 7,400 odd 1,000 million cubic feet of capacity is created. And it's done by a particular kind of people called the Manvaddars. Essentially, the Vaddars, Bhovi, Jananga, these are people who dug wells all around the Deccan Peninsula. I'm glad to be working with them now. These are also the people who actually did the earthwork for the tank. So they get involved in 1894. And in 1896, August 7, 55 liters per capita per day for a population of 2.5 lakhs starts to function from Hesarghatta. So Bangalore detaches itself from the tank ecosystem insofar as water supply is concerned and becomes one of the first places to get piped water supply from a river, because Hesarghatta is on the river Arkavati, and that's where the tank is coming, right? So what's interesting is that steam engines are used to pump water to the city. Firewood-driven steam engines, which is fascinating. Even at that time, the water is brought down in an aqueduct to a place called Tarabanhalli and Soldevanhalli. From that tower that you see, which is actually a sluice gate, it comes to a brick aqueduct, and the brick aqueduct brings it to Tarabanhalli, which, according to Professor Chanakya, is Tarbainhalli. It becomes Tarabanhalli in the local Kannada, and from there, and from Soldevanhalli, again water is pumped what's called the jewel filters. The jewel filters being the name of the company which makes these filters, which is now in Malleshwaram. At that point of time, it was called Hebbard, so it comes to jewel filters. And from there, the water is distributed to the civil and military station, which we now refer to as the cantonment, and the old Bangalore. And even at that time, there's a dispute between the water distribution. People fight how much water should go to the civil and military station and how much should come to the old Bangalore part of it, right? So Bangalore is now demonstrating that it can get a reliable supply of water from engineering feeds. And that persists. No? The history of Hesarghatta imprints itself on Bangalore. And all problems of water shortage are solved by engineering, by getting more and more water pumped from larger and larger distances, right? So that's fascinating with Bangalore. Very interesting things with Hesarghatta is in 1911 or 1912, electricity comes to Bangalore, comes to KGF, comes to the Maharaja's Palace, and electricity comes to Hesarghatta, and the steam engines are replaced by electric pumps, which are brought from Manchester, right? So the first, perhaps, use of electricity for pumping water happens in Bangalore with Hesarghatta. The first telephone lines are used to track the water supply and to measure the demand and supply, right? So telephone line goes to Hesarghatta, and then through telephones, you control the supply of water to the jewel filters and through to the city. At that time, it's drought and famine which is driving Bangalore to go to Hesarghatta. 1920s, again, drought and famine visits. And drought has to come in consecutive years for it to then become a problem. for us as water supply. So in 1920s, 3 tanks above Hesarghatta are breached, water brought to Hesarghatta, so that Hesarghatta can get filled and water can be pumped to Bangalore. And the farmers who lost their crops because those 3 tanks were breached get a compensation from the civil and military station as well as the city, right? So the first compensation, or broadly not clearly payment for ecological services, but payment for services lost for water supply. That happens from Bangalore city paying the compensation, and the civil and military station paying compensation to the farmers who lose their waters. And by 1920s, the water is inadequate already, and so therefore Tippagundanhalli starts to come up further downstream of Hesarghatta. But Hesarghatta and Bangalore, water and Bangalore are co-linked. What happens is there's a shortage, there's a crisis, populations can collapse, people can die, which was happening in the late 19th century. And water supply then comes to the city, and the city's population swells to absorb the water that is generated. And quickly there's a shortage again, so therefore a new project, and so on and so forth. And that's repeating itself all the way till Kaveri 4 stage. So Hesarghatta is water, technology, and solving a problem through engineering in one sense. And it's a legacy of water for us in the city.
Right.
I will talk about the aqueduct later on, but and we'll also talk about the siphon later on, perhaps, as we go through this conversation. But it's very interesting that how water ties Hesarghatta to Bangalore.
Right. So this is a photo, what is remaining of that aqueduct photographed this morning. We'll talk about it later, because, you know, this is the situation. The thing is, I think, yeah, this is.
So it's brick arches, lime mortar, granite slabs, no steel. It's a fabulous engineering heritage, but also a lot of bricks for the houses which are being built surrounding by capturing it. So heritage is a living heritage in the Bangalore context, and people sort of appropriate whatever remains of the structure.
Right. Yeah. So now, okay, this is I think the Panchagiri, the Chikkanayakkanahalli area, north of Hesarghatta. Arkavati, the river Arkavati, there is it's about, I think Uday Kumar showed me there is an inscription stone in Hesarghatta that was resurrected by some local friends. The word Arkavati is mentioned about 1,000 years ago. Exactly 1,000 years ago. So it's a river that has, or a rivulet that has been there for such a long time. I mean, 1,000 years is what we know, maybe earlier, who knows. So that originates here. It's Chikkanayakkanahalli. Though there is a board in Nandi Hills as the origin point of Arkavati, which I don't think is really right, and this is where it starts and then flows down to join Vrishabhavati and then to Kaveri later. So okay, this was, as I had seen it in 2004, it was completely dry. So people were trying to, they had set up a kind of a loose group of local people. And so I went and met them. So then we started working on it. We walked through the lake and started to understand what it was and what we could do. So one thing that so we met the Bangalore Water Supply and BWSSB, and BWSSB flatly said that they didn't have the money to do anything. And they also said, very interestingly, they said, our mandate is to bring water. Our mandate is not to preserve that source of water. Yeah, if you show me the source of water, I'll bring it and give it to you. That was my mandate. So if that source goes dry, then I can't do anything about it. So that was, in as many words, the chairman of BWSSB at that time told us. I mean, as opposed to New York City, which it really looks after the source of water, the Catskill Mountains. And there's a beautiful article in New York Times on how beautifully they have been maintaining it for such a long time. We don't. So we went. So one thing to do was that after surveying the lake, and the BWSSB also told us that if you guys want to do some work and try and get some water into the lake, we will give you permission. And they gave that in writing so that we didn't have to, nobody would come and ask us. So in 2005, we started working on there was a channel. The village people told me that there was a channel that came from a village called Dasenhalli. It's It's called Dasenahalli Khane. That used to bring water, and they said there is a very big channel. It had completely silted up, so we decided to open it up. So that's how the work started. It was around 2004 or 5, early 2005, I guess. And this is some images. One which I will touch upon this later. There was a lot at that time. There was a lot of camaraderie within the group of people. The what do you call, whatever the curse or whatever you call it of real estate hadn't come in yet. So there was a lot of unity, and therefore we could do a lot of work. And this is the first time the water again flowed after many years in the Dasenahalli Khane into the lake. And this was all, I mean, people were doing Shramdan, and that's how the work was done. So a chartered accountant who was got a farm nearby, Mr. Devraj of Dev Singhvi and Unni, a very big chartered accountant firm in Bangalore. He was driving by as we were working, and then he stopped and talked to us. And then he's a great guy. So he helped us by getting one of his clients donate the time of a JCB. The JCB, we had a JCB for a month with us, thanks to Devraj, Mr. Devraj, and he paid for the diesel, and villagers looked after the driver for a month. They gave him food, shelter, etc. So we were able to do a lot of work, and that channel still brings in a lot of water into the lake, even today, after about 16 years. These are some of the photographs from the just before we started work, etc. This is the Dasenahalli Khane photographed in the last couple of years. So this group of people worked a lot, and we did a lot of work to try and conserve the catchment area of that of Hesarghata. So meanwhile, there was a lot of other activities going on in the northern side of Hesarghata, in Doddaballapura, a little bit near Tumkur, Kumudwati, where the Kumudwati river was flowing from, etc. So we got together, and all these different groups, and formed something called Arkavati Mattu Kumudwati Nadi Punaschetana Samiti. So we even registered it as a trust. Mr. Sitaram, who is from the Doddaballapura side, Ardeshahalli, who had worked a lot in reducing or stopping pollution from the garment units. Mr. Jairam, who is an advocate and an organic farmer from Nelamangala side, Janardhan Kesaragadde, and the young group of volunteers from Doddaballapura. We worked a lot trying to get the government to listen to us, the government to start maybe desilting the canals of Arkavati and Kumudwati, and try and get water into the lakes. So the thing is that this is actually the Arkavati river within Hesarghata lake. So this our organization worked quite well for several years, and we had meetings with the ministers, meetings with the legislators, and however, whatever we did, the government actually unfortunately didn't listen to us.
Mahesh, I'll just sort of point out a couple of interesting things here, right? The color of the water. So even from that time, silt has been a challenge. Though it was designed as filtered water to come to Bangalore, the water was pumped raw to jewel filters in Hebbal, and the filtration was done in Malleshwaram, right? Hebbal or Malleshwaram now. So this was called, referred to as Sheshadri's coffee for a long time, because the water would be silty, which would come. And that's an allegory also to Sankey's coffee, because when Sankey tank was built and water was supplied, it was called Sankey's coffee. This was Sheshadri's coffee for a long time. Silt has been a challenge and will continue to remain a challenge, because our history of tanks was tanks as irrigation. purpose, right? So therefore, there was a natural demand for silt by the farmers. Farmers would desilt it every year and apply it in the command area, in the Achkat area, and therefore the tank would get desilted. But now when you start to design a drinking water reservoir, the purpose is no longer irrigation. There's no sort of demand on the silt itself, and therefore silting will occur. And in the absence of a river basin institution or an institution which is responsible for the tank's upkeep, you will find that the tank is not maintained, right? And another point that I have to add with Hesarghatta is that typically, even in 1894s, there was a lot of investment in bringing water to the city. There was not enough investment to take away the water. So whatever is the wastewater or the sewage generated, that was not taken away. And the plague hit us in 1898. If you remember it. So this water had come in 1896, 1898 was the plague. And one hypothesis is because we badly managed the wastewater, which came from Hesarghatta, that the conditions for the rat and for the flea was made ripe in the city, and therefore plague became even more severe thanks to Hesarghatta. So dubious equations also are running along with the water supply to the city, right? So that's Hesarghatta for you.
Right. So our efforts. I mean, the other thing is when Vishwanath said that the river basin institution, we tried to get the government to set up a river basin institution for Arkavati and Kumudvati, but that didn't happen either. Government of Karnataka at one point in time did allocate some amount of money to ostensibly to rejuvenate Arkavati river, about 23 odd crores. But I think there's no trace of some work did happen of some JCBs going and clearing out some channels, Rajakaluways, but it's basically it's gone down the drain. Nothing much has happened. It has. What happened was, all the work, after some time, our own organization, which was Arkavati Kumudvati Nadi Punaschetana Samiti, AKNPS, that also kind of went defunct, so to speak. We were unable to push beyond some amount of, we did quite a bit of work, but we were unable to go beyond a threshold due to lack of funds. It was difficult to raise funds, and also some key people moved out of the city, etc. Various reasons. The local people, the people of Hesarghatta also, the politics started playing a big part, or the politics or the difference in political ideology is within the key members kind of pushed them apart, and the whole effort kind of died down.
Mahesh, you want to go back to the lake and the hill photograph? Just to remind you of some of the things. So the lake that Mahesh showed, which is the first kere or the first tank established on the Arkavati, it's called Chikrayapanhalli. Chikrayapanhalli. That's Chikrayapanhalli. And here's the thing with institutional memory, because one of the imaginations of the revival of Arkavati was with the Thames. There was a politician who was saying that we will make it like the Thames, we'll revive the Arkavati like the Thames. I mean, bizarre things. But around Chikrayapanhalli Lake, which is the first lake on the Arkavati, there was a very interesting project called WENEXA, Water and Energy Nexus project, which was implemented by, of all agencies, BESCOM. And what that project sought to do was to change the pumps in the borewells, in about 600 odd borewells, and replace them with energy efficient pumps, because all the pumps which the irrigation borewells were using were energy inefficient. And in addition to replacing those pumps, they gave drip irrigation systems to the farmers. And they locked in the system of electricity distribution through the grid by appropriate voltage stabilizers and transformers, which could not be expanded, and therefore they locked in the drilling of newer borewells. One of the reasons why the Arkavati went dry and why Hesarghatta went dry is the over-extraction of groundwater and the planting of eucalyptus. So WENEXA wanted to address this over-extraction of groundwater through an energy intervention, and it did a fabulous job. Most of the farmers reported a huge increase in income. Energy losses went down dramatically because these were energy efficient pump sets, and the groundwater table actually came up. Many of the wells around Chikrayapanhalli Lake and Dodarayapanhalli, which is further downstream, the wells had water. But the project was simply not scaled up. Ideally, it would have been scaled up to the whole river, and then it would have made a difference to the flow of the Arkavati. But because it was being looked after by the energy department and not by the groundwater department or the water resource department, nobody saw the positive effects of the project, and that collapsed. So the history of our rivers and of our water are also of good projects not being taken to their logical conclusion. So, and citizens' efforts constantly trying to remind the government about the famous Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the battle between memory and forgetfulness, right? So how do we get us to remember in our memory the good efforts that we put in and try and make sure that that gets replicated and preserved? Sorry for that interjection, but that's Chikrayapanhalli for you. It's one of the most beautiful keres that you could possibly see. And one of the reasons why one doesn't talk too much about it is you don't want people from Bangalore to descend there and then desecrate it, right? So that's our tragedy also, that the good spots have to be kept hidden. Otherwise, beer bottles and plastic will make an appearance in no time.
Yeah, Hesaraghatta Lake Bed has a feat of that. So at that time, there's another. Our work was going on, our effort was going on. It went up. We did a lot of work. The efforts dwindled. So this was between 2004. All this happened between 2005 and 2010, 11, about 5 or 6 years. In between, so Hesaraghatta Lake is about reservoir is about 1,500 acres. It is connected to immediately. I mean, just there is a bund, and then there is Kakolu Lake, Kere, and there is Byata Kere on the northern side and northwestern side, and a little beyond that is the Madurai Kere. All put together, maybe about I don't know, maybe about 2,500 acres of wetland. They are all connected, and water used to flow from one to another, and the series of tanks. Like it's a large wetland in the middle of this Deccan dry kind of arid area. So the immediate catchment of Hesaraghatta Reservoir is about 3,500 to 4,000 acres. This entire land is owned by the government of Karnataka, Department of Animal Husbandry and Veterinary Services. So there we have about a 345-acre grassland, which is this. I live right next to it. And Nrityagram is also right there. So this is many images of the grassland. It's a beautiful 2 kilometer in length, 1 kilometer in width. And there is about 900 acres of scrub jungle right after that. So the water slopes, the land slopes, and then goes into all the water that falls and it goes into the lake, most of the water rather. So this grassland was given to the Animal Husbandry Department, sold actually by Maharaja of Mysore in 1942 for 42 or 43 for 10,000 rupees for the activities so that the department can carry on its activities. Sometime in the 70s, I think then the government set up Mysore Film Industries Corporation and gave this grassland on lease. This is a part of the scrub jungle. So this grassland on a 99-year lease to Mysore Film Industries Development Corporation to develop a film city. Okay, so there was a lot of water then, so there was not an issue and nobody really bothered. So everybody welcomed the idea. However, nothing happened. The Mysore Film Industries Development Corporation became Karnataka Film Industries Development Corporation because then the Karnataka state was formed and the lease was there. The work on the film city, they had many meetings, but it didn't go forward. Pratima Bedi got 10 acres to build Nrityagram from Ramakrishna Hegde's government, and then there was the government Film and TV Institute came up on another 25 acres, and the Adarsha Film Institute came up on about 10 acres. They were all on shorter leases. Then again, by about 2012, the real estate market was hotting up, and the government or the film department, they wanted, or the film industry, they wanted to rekindle this idea of film city. So, and we were waiting and watching, and they then the government did put out an e-tender from people who are interested in investing in this film city. So we immediately went to the High Court, put a public interest litigation, and the High Court immediately gave a stay, and the case went on for 3 years. The government did not give any response. I think it was Mr. Yediyurappa's government at that time. And finally, the Advocate General said that the government, by the time Mr. Siddaramaya's government had come in, the Advocate General gave an undertaking before the High Court saying that they would not carry out any activities there, and they'll wait for the cabinet decision, and that all the precautions would be taken care of, all apprehensions of everybody, that is us, would be taken care of before taking a decision. So the Siddaramaya's government gave the land then finally back to the Animal Husbandry Department from Kantirava Studios. In between, the Karnataka Film Industries Development Corporation had folded up, and the rights on the land were temporarily vested with Kantirava Studios. Film shootings were going on. Our film industry, Kannada film industry, was really kind of desecrating this land. They were, we had to go and clean up after they finished shooting. So finally, this went out of the hands of Kantirava Studio and went back to Animal Husbandry Department. All these activities stopped. I mean, when it was with Kantirava Studios, if one went early in the morning, suddenly you could see a battle tank there, with the gun, right at your face, because BHEL was doing some, they were developing some electronics, or so they would be doing some testing. So I actually had to have chased a battle tank out of that area once. So all these things were going on. So then we stopped that. But by that time, because it was a shooting place, shooting Agtaiya, shooting Nodak Bartivi, about hundreds of people started descending on that place. And I have actually chased about 100 people away once, me and a guard one evening. So this is commons. This grassland that you see is commons, but commons for the people of the area to maybe graze their cows, get some whatever else, largely for cow grazing of their cattle. It is not if people knew how to engage with nature, it's a great place to be for bird watchers or scientists, or even anybody who is interested, somebody who just wants to come there and be there. But unfortunately, our people don't know how to do it. Yeah.
Mahesh, I just want to add as to what kind of institutions could possibly co-involve themselves with Hesarghata. Like we have the Fodder Research Institute, right? So because it's a grassland, it seemed appropriate for the Fodder Research Institute to come and do a lot of research on fodder. And a lot of the grass seeds and grass goes all across India, right? Then there is the world famous Indian Institute for Horticultural Research, IIHR, which is one of its kind. And, right next door to one side of the lake. This grassland is to the other side. The next side is the IIHR. And IIHR does a pretty decent job of now trying to understand and manage water. Though at one point of time, they had run out of water next to Hesarghata. They had drilled bore wells, which had gone dry, 800, 900 feet. And they were struggling for water, but they realized the mistakes that they were doing. They went in for water harvesting and they revived one small lake, which is within their campus and just adjacent to it. And jackals have been sighted there. So perhaps one of the questions to ask ourselves is what land use should be permitted? And what should be the definition of the commons as we work along? So there is a lot of space for horticulture, agriculture research. There's a lot of necessity for ecological protection and conservation. But for sure, there is no space for other kinds of uses, right? And how do we get this vocabulary into the head of the decision makers has been your biggest challenge too.
Yes, very big. So I have to kind of answer that question that you posed. I'll also want to explain what has been happening, what has happened after that. The last court case, that was put in at 2012, and then that got disposed of in 2015. So, I knew that unless this area had some kind of legal umbrella, so to speak, of these 5,000 acres I'm talking about, 3,500 acres of lake bed and 3,500 acres of other area, grassland, stub jungles, etc. Though it's owned by government of Karnataka, the dangers of it being usurped by the real estate mafias was clear and present. In fact, even that were discussed at a Vidhana Parishad discussion, and there is a written record of what is called a Vidhana Parishad Bharavase, where a member MLC has actually had expressed this in as many words, saying that it can be usurped by the. So some of us we proposed made a plan that involved Ramkrishna Srinivasan, MBK, who is here, who is also a part of that brainstorming sessions, and Sheshkesh Sheshadri. And we made a proposal and gave it to the Forest Department. That was sometime in 2012, to declare this area as a conservation reserve under 36A of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. What does that mean is that it gets another layer of protection. The land ownership doesn't change, and neither does, it's not like a national park and that then you have to have a buffer zone, etc., etc. Nothing of that sort. Everything remains the same, but it cannot, once it's declared as a conservation reserve, the area cannot be alienated into commercial activities so quickly. So this proposal kind of gathered dust for a very, very long time. And the Forest Department, in fact, came and mapped the area and immediately lost that map as well. And finally, however, we kept on pushing. That was for about 4 or 5 years. And finally, it came up before the State Wildlife Board. The procedure to declare any area as a conservation reserve has to go to the State Wildlife Board, though it's not in the law. The law says the government can declare, but there is a procedure set here, and the State Wildlife Board can approve it. However, this was scuttled, and it just didn't. It was kind of rejected. This proposal was rejected in the State Wildlife Board meeting that took place in Jan or Feb 2021. And again, we were kind of mulling our legal options. Then one Mr. Vijay Nishant went to the High Court and got a stay on it. Then that's me, Ramki, and Sitaram, we also put up a public interest litigation, which was very comprehensive, a couple of months later, and it is in the High Court right now. The High Court immediately granted stay, a status quo order rather. So the government cannot do anything. Nobody can do anything right now. So the state government has now applied to the High Court and moved a petition to vacate the stay to build a cattle theme park. This is in the public domain because the minister has said that. I can't tell the details because it's sub judice. I'm just sharing what is in the public domain. Therefore, the institution that should have gotten involved, whether it is Fodder Research Institute, it could even be organizations like ATRI, are not being involved, but some really outlandish ideas are being thrust upon people so they want to alienate about 100 acres of land of the 345 acres of this area and build this theme park. Of course, it's there is a status of the status quo order, so that can't go ahead, and that is the situation as of now. So that's the tragedy, really speaking.
Yeah. And in the water imagination, Hesarghatta is now likely to be filled by what's called the Yethinhole project, which is the diversion from the Western Ghats bringing water 220 kilometers to fill Hesarghatta and then flow down to Tipgondanhalli. So imaginations of the space is changing. Yes. And Mahesh sort of forgot to mention one fact that the BDA went about planting 1 lakh trees in what's essentially a grassland, because the notion of a grassland does not exist in the heads of a lot of bureaucrats. So therefore, tree plantation was taken up with expected disastrous results. Yes. So none of the trees survived, right?
Yeah, there it is. This was around, I can't remember, 2012-13 or so. There was a project called Namma Hasiru Male, Our Green Garland. That was initiated by the Bangalore Development BDA. So they wanted to plant 1 lakh saplings on this, 1 lakh saplings at the cost of 140 rupees per sapling. So that was about 1.5 crores. The project was much bigger. They planted in every open government land that was in the city. Okay, in the heights of summer, they would plant and they would get water from in tankers and water it. And I vehemently opposed it and somehow stopped it with great difficulty. But by that time, they had already planted a heck of a lot of saplings, and today 99% are dead. Yeah. So I'm sure that's the same case with other areas as well. So this is the kind of so what has also happened is this whole issue, the whole point of subject of compensatory afforestation and urban afforestation. The central government has recently released 46,000 crores to states for urban afforestation and compensatory afforestation, if I'm not wrong. It's just huge amount of money to be made at various quarters, unfortunately. Yeah.
Perhaps you'd like to open it up to others, because this is both a natural heritage as well as a human-built heritage. In terms of the water, it's a built heritage that we need to think about, protect, preserve. And there's a natural heritage in terms of the grassland. And combined, it's an excellent heritage zone for a city, which is unfortunately being desecrated is the word to use. So perhaps some feedback from...
This is the latest photograph. A lot of water came in because of the November rains, though unseasonal. So it's quite a bit of water now. And this is some of the wildlife that was found. A lot of the bird, there are over 200, I think the Bangalore Birds website has listed over 200 species of birds. There's this red-headed falcon. I'm not a birder, so, and you can see a fox there. It's all in the grassland. A Russell's viper. And this is greater spotted eagle, which is in the vulnerable list of IUCN, which is a migratory bird that comes in that area. One of our young friends, an entomologist, Yashwant, who is a Hesarghatta boy because I know him from his college days. He is a PhD in entomology now. He's Subbu Subramania's Shishya, and he's found new species of insects. He's described them, and that has been published. So it's a very rich area for wildlife. An otter was spotted last year. We have no clue how it came, where it came from, where it went.
Opa.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was in touch with him. So, so this is, that's how, as Vishwanath said it, the heritage is indescribable of that historical water, wildlife, flora, fauna, and the built, and needs to be preserved for generations to come. Then that's our effort.
And MBK's favorite place, photographers chasing wildlife and birds and tiring them out, chasing them on four-wheelers and two-wheelers and making a nuisance of themselves. That's also happening here because of this, the lack of care of keeping them away. So.
But now it's stopped a bit. The grassland is also kind of trenched out.
Yes.
And
the lake is also.
Has been fenced up in anticipation of water. So, yeah.
So, you want some comments perhaps?
Yeah, if anybody has Any questions?
So, Mahesh and Vishy, thank you so much. That was such a lovely presentation. I had a question about the Yettinahole project, and while I do know, I mean, with reference to Hesarghatta, I do know that project has multiple issues, but I wanted to ask you if you were to do a projection and assume that project actually starts delivering water to Hesarghatta, at the end of the day, will that be for this micro ecosystem of 5,000 acres? Would it be a good thing or a bad thing? What do you think is going to happen when that regular supply actually starts coming in? I'm sort of just trying to visualize the future with that additional input coming in as well.
So, Gopal, the imagination of that water is 35 million liters per day to the city of Bangalore. There's no imagination of any ecological benefits or any other benefit, right? And then it's supposed to cascade down to Tipgondanhalli, from where another 150 MLD is supposed to be drawn to the city, right? So, Yettinahole waters are looked at as piped water coming in to augment the water requirements of a thirsty Bangalore. That's the only imagination that there is. So, nothing about the environment, nothing about the ecosystem, nothing about biodiversity, nothing about the otters.
I have a question since I have the mic. Mahesh, what remains of the heritage sort of pumping stations, the aqueducts, and all of that infrastructure that was created? And Vishnu, this question is like, well, what is this? As in, what remains of the ecology of the place? Is it far too gone, or is it somewhere in between?
The flora fauna, I mean, it's luckily it is in a good place as of now. The reason being because the land is owned by the government and these farms, and their activity is low impact as of now. So there isn't much of an issue. A lot of private farms are being developed in the sense the lands are changing hands, people are building their houses, so that's inevitable. Just not too far from the grassland area, there's a Rajiv Gandhi urban housing schemes, massive multi-storied complex coming up. It has its own problems because nobody knows where the water will come from. It's supposed to be low-cost housing, but nobody knows where the water is coming from. Nobody knows where the sewage will go, and there's no connectivity. There are no buses for people to go up and down. So, but the construction is going on. So all this will impact in many ways. This is what is happening with the aqueduct. This is photographed this morning. It's become a garbage dump. I've been trying to, I've made some effort, not a half-hearted rather, I would say, to try and get it at least conserved, with some, this is our heritage, right? We need to have it. I mean, look at the state it is in. This is the first pipe to water into the city, okay? This is the state. So, to give you an example of how people think of it, I was discussing this many years ago with our member of parliament, and I said, sir, we need this to be done. So he looked at the officials and said, official said, illa neer baradilla, there's no water, it's not supplying any water. So he looked at me and said, batre, first now eldring neer kodana, amele idella madana. Let's supply water to people, and then we'll look at heritage, etc. So that's the kind of a mindset the leaders come from. Sad. I mean,
yeah. So one has been working with the BWSSB and with INTAC to try and see what can be done about the aqueduct as well as the pumping stations. The Soldevanhalli pumping station had the steam engine, right? There's no trace of the steam engine, unfortunately, and there's no record also. So we're really trying to figure out what kind of steam engine was used. Also, the first electric engine or the motor pump which was used there is no longer there. We have pump sets from the 1930s onwards. That's there at Soldevanhalli. Luckily, that will be protected and preserved. The Soldevanhalli pumping station will be protected and preserved because of some intervention that happened. The BWSSB itself is setting up a water heritage museum. And they're planning to do it in Malleshwaram, which is the end receiving point where the jewel filters are. So there's some investments that's happening there. One is trying to push them to think about that. There's a beautiful volute siphon there. The siphon has been protected. It's been painted and it's in
good condition.
It's in reasonably good condition. There's no drawing explaining it. So there's a fair chance that some of the elements of the water heritage will be protected.
No, this can be really, I mean, if somebody puts in some amount of money and if Intact can, provide their expertise, I think this can really be, kind of restored and can be kept well. I think it needs in need of the hour, so we must do that. It's important to conserve the culture as well, right? So
So the Ganesh Iyer volute siphon there were only 3 insofar as I know which were built in Karnataka in the mid 30s. One of them is this one, and it's also somebody from Indian Institute of Science designing it and building it. So all the more reason for us to understand what civil engineering heritage it brings to us. So that's something that we need to keep in mind.
Krishna.
Yes, the siphons were built out of brick and lime mortar, right? There were funnels, so there was no concrete used. There was no steel there, and it's a unique combination of a volute siphon and a hemispheric siphon. It's a combination of both. Though the villagers themselves say that when the lake used to overflow, the sound of the siphon could be heard to about 8 to 10 kilometers, and they would know that the Kodi is overflowing, and they would come to that place. The civil engineers say that also reflects on the stability of the siphon itself, and it's not perhaps ideal, but there's something to learn from that. The siphon, and nobody knows how to design siphons now. Nobody uses them as overflow systems for our lakes and reservoirs.
What was interesting is during the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, the first, even the jets were not flying, and because our place, it's a landing kind of that. They land a little north of Hesarghatta. That's a landing path, so you can hear them constantly flying. It's a low drones of the jet engines. There was no sound. There was nothing, and I have actually gone and recorded the sound of the grassland. And absolutely no man-made sound, nothing at all. So it was really, really beautiful to be there, sit in the grass, and just birds, wind through the flowing through this tall grass, and absolutely no man-made sound. It was a great thing, and I knew it was not going to last, so I kind of recorded it on my Zoom recorder.
Yeah, I just have one question. You mentioned something about you cannot grow trees on grassland. Can you just elaborate more on that? Because this was something I was completely not aware of.
I'm Krishna. I'm a bird watcher. So my interest has been in nature. So I think that would give me give an introduction to me. Basically, what has happened is that if you look at the globe, you find different vegetational formations depending on the area, the sunlight, like the latitude, and the soil conditions, and most importantly, water. So if you take Bangalore or even surrounding areas which have a little lesser rainfall of say 700 millimeters per year, we can technically support what is botanically called a dry deciduous forest. Now a forest becomes scrub because of animal activity. Essentially here the animal would be human beings. But what we can safely say is that pure grasslands are as abnormal as imagining a forest as even as a plantation. So what should Hesarghatta be, if you ask me? Should be like something like a savanna with scattered trees and grass. Now, if you ask me what is the advantage of this kind of a situation over a plain grassland, is that tree roots go deeper, and grass roots are shallower than tree roots. Even if you assume that like prairie grass roots go deep, they'll not be as deep as tree roots. So what do tree roots do? I'm taking the liberty here of making this a little educative so that I'm sharing opinions. A lot of recent work has gone in to show that tree roots transport water. We assume that they transport water only up, but apparently tree roots also transport a lot of water from a dry part where the spread of the roots go to a wet part, from a wet part to a dry part. So that there's a lot of movement, and if you look at it spatially, you will notice that grass under trees dries later than the grass which is exposed. Which means that if you are imagining a landscape and looking at wildlife, looking at grasses, looking at flowering of plants and bird life and insect life, the presence of scattered trees makes the area heterogeneous and the whole flowering period wider. Flowering or the phenological stages. So having scattered trees is not bad.
Yeah, that's true. But the point is that the soil system and the soil moisture does not allow a dominant tree growth in that area. It's mostly grasses and shrubs that survive in that particular ecotone or the biome there. And trees would be an intrusion. The trees would need a lot of artificial watering to support it at scale, right? So some of the scrub jungle, some of the natural trees would be there, but few in number. The grasses would be dominant.
The only point I'd like to add here is that during conversations, a lot of people mention trees and say trees draw water, mentioning one particular tree which Vishwanath also did. The water drawn by a coconut tree and a plantation of coconut is much, much more than any other dicot tree that we have in our country. To give you a rough idea, though if you don't ask me for references because offhand I don't remember it, a coconut tree draws something like 200 liters of water a day, a good well-grown coconut tree.
The other thing is there are many animals and birds which live only on the grassland. Like for example, if you, the wolf, if you go to northern Karnataka, the wolf, the black bucks live there on the what used to be grassland, now the farmlands. And because black buck is a prey, I mean the predator is the wolf's food is black buck, it's there too. So you see wolves and black bucks and jungle cats and a lot of other birds and animals. They live only on grassland, like the great Indian bustard. They can't live in a wooded area. In Ranebennur, the black bucks, in the black buck sanctuary, the forest department went and planted trees. When the trees grew, leopards came, wolf vanished. So all sorts of, it leads to all sorts of things, all sorts of undesirable issues.
I'd like to introduce myself. In the 70s, I bought a farm in that Hesarghatta area across the lake, opposite where the film studio came up later. When I bought it in 74, I'm an agricultural graduate, and I thought of farming in that area. I had a 20-acre farm, and I was cultivating quite a lot of fruits and even brought strawberries to Bangalore through my farm. Anyway, the point I was making was that when I came there in 74, I think, the lake was full. It used to even overflow. I remember there used to be floods, and if I had to get out of my farm into even Hesarghatta village, many times I was waterlogged. I couldn't get out. So the question that I want to ask basically is that how, I was out of the country for some 10 years, how did the water disappear or vanish or whatever the word we would like to use? Can you please explain?
So a couple of things have happened apart from many other things. So Hesarghatta is the recipient of overflows of all the tank ecosystem upstream of it, including one of the biggest one, which is Dodballapur that you know about. Most of the tanks are in a state of disrepair. The feeder channels to the tanks are gone. They're all silted up. There is no channel flow which is coming to the stream, which is the Arkavati, which would bring it to Hesarghatta. That's one of the reasons. The second has been the over-extraction of groundwater. So soil moisture is in deficit. Aquifers are depleted. So when it rains, and if it's a low gentle rain, it goes to make up soil moisture deficit. It makes up shallow aquifer deficit. Then there is overflow. That overflow is minimal now. It's been reduced. Third, though MBK would disagree, but a lot of planting of monoculture of eucalyptus has also depleted. In addition to that, crop cultivation, agricultural fields have increased. Therefore, agricultural fields in themselves are a means of leveling the field and building bunds all across. So even if you grow ragi and if your field is level, the runoff that occurs from a ragi field is much lesser than what it would have been if it was sloped and uncultivated, right? So all these changes in the catchment have impacted Hesarghatta. Summer flows have disappeared completely. Spring flows have disappeared completely. And even monsoon flows are now diverted all across and spread all across the tanks, which evaporates and doesn't land up in Hesarghatta. So it's a whole deterioration of the entire catchment that is causing this.
Vishwanath, why were siphons used rather than allowing water to overflow over area?
So siphons have a larger discharge volume as compared to an overflow weir. And for in smaller areas, they can take away and put more water away from the tank into the main channel. That's one of the major reasons. And the combination of the Ganesha Iyer siphon is what's called a saddle siphon and a volute siphon. The saddle and the volute siphon together act to discharge water at in rates of 12x to 14x than that of gravity flow. That's the reason why siphons are built. So even a heavy flood can be handled by a small siphon and managed very well. Whereas the overflow weir would cause backup and then flooding in the upper catchment areas.
Hi, I'm Abhishek. I just had a few comments. As you, Mr. Mahesh said that the 100-acre cattle park, that actually came up in the budget, right? Because of the cattle slaughter bill, in order to appease the, the people who are kind of stunned by this thing. It has come up there. I'm not sure. So they've added a 25-acre Gaushala there. They've allocated land there to a Gaushala. I don't know whether that has come up or not as of now. But also, I'm not very sure whether the 25-acre is part of that 100-acre cattle park as such. But I don't expect the government to do a decent job of that place anyways. So that's...
Yeah, that Gaushala is in a slightly... it's not on the grassland area, but you saw some photographs of where we were working that, and it's called Dasinahalli Kane. There, it's going to be there. I hope they won't, kind of close that channel because it'll flood at some point in time. That's where it's supposed to come up. There's a 50-acre land there, which is a little south of, west of the grassland, very close to the lake, next to the Central Poultry Development Organization. It's supposed to be there's a dog shelter, some cow feed, manufacturing unit, and Gaushala. Yeah.
Have you seen an influx of cattle in the past 6-8 months?
No.
Not really.
No. It's not, work hasn't started yet.
It's not building. You spoke about the 5,000 acres catchment area, right?
Yeah.
And then we moved on to the 400 acres grassland and the lake. What about the 4,500 acres as such? We haven't, I did read about it, but if you could discuss a bit.
About 3,100 acres of that. That's where all the farms are there. There are, the frozen cement bank, the rabbit farm, the piggery farm, the fisheries farm. There's all these, they have been there for a long, long time and they're carrying out that.
So is that still considered a good catchment area? For
yes.
Though the channels within are do need a lot of desilting and repair, even within the IIHR, for example, and
yes.
for the other ones. The flows outside these landscapes are now being controlled by the demands of water within the IIHR, for example. So they don't want it to go out and they would like to capture it themselves.
Okay. So can you tell me the impact of the past 2 months, the rains as such, how have they impacted the thinking of the people or their perception of the Arkavati, the Nandi Hills, the lakes there, and stuff?
You saw the photograph. I won't shift the pictures, but you saw the photographs of the recent, a lot of rain. See, what happens is when rains come in, people flock to look at then others set up shops. It becomes a small tourist area. The basic thinking doesn't change because there are other pressures in the society. It's another long discussion if I get into it, but I have not seen anything impacting positively in the sense of somebody saying, okay, we need to preserve it, except few here and there. It's to give you a recent conversation. There is a young man has set up a car wash place near Hesarghatta. I take my car there for washing. It's red soil and car is always muddy. So, and he asked me, do you understand Kannada? Okay. So, film city barutante bandre illala development aguttante agtara. So there was another young man sitting right there, and he vigorously shook his head and said, "Beda, beda, beda." So, and this other chap, he works at somewhere near Devanahalli, and he said, see, I have seen what has happened to Devanahalli because the so-called development due to the airport coming there, and he said, I don't want that to happen to my place, that is Hesarghatta. So both are of the same age, in their late 20s, and so most of the people want to see glitzy malls, lights, etc., etc. The garbage and other things have become a blind spot. There are very few who, and this water flowing in, rains happening is not really changing anything much as of now.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, my name is Rajni. I've been closely following a particular road which is very close by. I'm also a petitioner in a PIL. This is built by KRDCL, the Bangalore Surrounding Roads project. So recently, because they've been cutting down trees and saying they'll transplant, the university GKVK, an expert team has identified that a lot of trees around Nelmangla, Madurai, which are going to be felled, a lot of them already gone, will be transplanted to save them into the lake area. So having heard what you said about tree transplantation, I had a question about ownership. Who owns this grassland? Because here is an expert committee under the High Court which has decided that these trees can be saved. They've asked the project proponent, which is KRDCL, which doesn't own the land, to identify close by areas, and they seem to have identified Hesarghatta Lake and a few other lakes around, and they plan to transplant. So my question is, as a normal citizen, what can I do? Because I've been petitioning, I've been writing to Forest Department, the project proponents. If there is anything of scientific, I've even sent off a legal notice with the help of my advocate. She's also here today. What can we do more, and how can, who is the owner of this land, of the lake? And what can we say? So status quo you mentioned in your case. What is the meaning of the status quo? That is also another question.
The lake itself, 1,500 acres, is owned by BWSSB. The rest of the land is owned by Karnataka. There's a Department of Animal Husbandry and Veterinary Services. Parcels of which has been leased out to maybe the central government basically central government, and small portion to others. So that's the status, ownership of it. The road that you mentioned, yes, I'm aware of it, and it's a disaster, right? So, humongous trees have been cut, destroyed. And whatever they're going to transplant, I don't know where they're going to transplant that. If it is the lake bed, then they'll have to talk to the BWSSB. The status quo basically says that it should be as it is now, till the next, till the case is disposed of. So it has to be as it is now. So that's what it is. They can't do anything. But I think If they have to plant trees, I guess they have to go to the High Court and get permission to do that. If they have to transplant them there. I don't know where will they transplant that on the lake bed. I have no clue. Will they even survive? I don't know. In fact, the road goes on the lake, on the northern end of the lake. You would have seen it. So it's terrible.
Just to add on, the problem that we have faced with the Forest Department is they are interpreting the judgment in your order, in your matter, January 2015, as the land that was given back to animal husbandry, the status quo is applicable to that portion only. The rest does not apply to them. Because after the legal notice, the DCA for Urban has followed it up with another direction to KRDCL by quoting all the High Court's order that were there in the legal notice. And upon following up with him, he says that the legal status quo order from the High Court is only applicable to the land that is under the possession of animal husbandry and not under the other authorities. But here we know that the proposal that was rejected for the conservation reserve is not only the land that is there with the animal husbandry, but much beyond it. So the further question would be that what did the state board reject? Is the proposal that was given by the citizens, or was it a different proposal that the state board had considered and rejected? Are they the same or they're different?
The legal, I think I can have a separate discussion with you on that. But state board rejected the proposal given by us, which the Forest Department presented to the State Wildlife Board. Right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vishwanath. Thank you so much, Mahesh, for this very important discussion. We do hope we can salvage something of what is left in Hesarghatta. Thank you again. And thank you, audiences, for joining us today.
Thank you.